On a crisp autumn morning, the sleepy town of Riverton began to stir, unaware that the events of the day would ripple through every household by nightfall. Emily Cooper moved through her kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixing with the cool air drifting through the open window. She paused to listen to the faint hum of life outside, the clatter of garbage trucks, the distant barking of dogs, and the occasional honking of cars as parents rushed to drop their kids off at school. Her children, Tommy and Lily, sat at the kitchen table, giggling over a comic book while eating their cereal. Everything seemed just as it always was. Emily smiled at the peaceful scene, pouring herself a cup of coffee and heading to the porch. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her body, fighting off the chill in the air, but inside, she felt warm. Life was good. Life was predictable. That's how she liked it. Riverton was a town where everyone knew everyone. She had been teaching at the local elementary school for nearly a decade, and her husband, John, had his steady job as a contractor. They were the quintessential happy family. But then, without warning, her peaceful morning shattered. Two figures appeared at the edge of her driveway, walking slowly toward the house. Emily squinted, placing her mug down on the porch railing. The strangers, a man and a woman, were oddly out of place in this quiet neighborhood. Both wore dark, professional-looking coats, the man in sunglasses despite the lack of sun, the woman clutching a small leather briefcase. There was something about their synchronized steps and unreadable expressions that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Before she could move, they were standing at the bottom of her porch stairs. "Emily Cooper?" the man asked, his voice crisp and businesslike. He didn't offer a greeting, just the question, as if he already knew the answer. "Yes," Emily replied cautiously, glancing behind her toward the door, wondering if she should call John. "Can I help you?" The woman, who had remained silent, stepped forward and opened her briefcase. Inside were papers, documents, photos, things Emily couldn't quite make out at a glance, but her hands trembled as she saw a familiar image. "Mrs. Cooper," the woman began, her tone soft but firm. "We need to talk about your past." "My past?" Emily echoed, her heart now hammering in her chest. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are, and I think you must have the wrong person." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression a mixture of sympathy and something else Emily couldn't quite place. "I assure you, we're not mistaken. We've been looking for you for a long time." Emily felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Looking for me?" She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't understand." The man removed his sunglasses, revealing piercing blue eyes that locked onto hers. "Emily, you're not who you think you are." It felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. The words hung there, heavy and foreboding, and she couldn't bring herself to respond. All she could think about were the ordinary moments of her life. Her family, her children, her job. How could these strangers, with their dark coats and official air, walk into her life and suggest something so absurd? "I think you need to leave," Emily finally managed, stepping backward toward the door. The man raised his hand in a calming gesture. "Please, we're not here to cause trouble. But there are things you need to know. Things that have been hidden from you for a long time." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily whispered, gripping the doorknob tightly. "My life is here. I know who I am. You're mistaken." The woman sighed, closing the briefcase. "Emily, you were born under a different name, in a different place. You were part of a family, an important family, that you've been hidden from for decades. This isn't a mistake." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? I grew up in foster care. My parents died when I was a baby." "Your parents didn't die," the man interrupted, his tone sharp. "They were involved in something dangerous. You were placed into foster care under a false identity to protect you." She stared at them, speechless. Her past, something she had never questioned, was suddenly under siege by these strangers who spoke of it like they knew her better than she knew herself. She felt the world tilt, the comfortable reality she had built starting to crack. "You have to leave," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Please, just leave." The woman hesitated, looking at her partner. "We know this is overwhelming. But please, take this." She handed Emily a small card with a phone number scrawled on it. "When you're ready to know the truth, call us." Emily stood frozen on the porch as the two strangers turned and walked back down the driveway, their steps as synchronized as when they had arrived. She watched them until they disappeared around the corner, the card heavy in her trembling hand. Her mind raced, each thought more impossible than the last. Her life, her identity, everything she thought she knew suddenly seemed fragile, as if it could collapse with a single word. She retreated inside, locking the door behind her. Tommy and Lily were still at the kitchen table, oblivious to the storm brewing inside their mother's mind. She could hear John moving around upstairs, getting ready for work. The house, her home, felt suffocating now, like the walls were closing in. She stared at the card, its numbers blurring in front of her eyes. What did they mean? "You're not who you think you are." Her mind jumped to a million conclusions, each more terrifying than the last. Could they be telling the truth? Had her entire life been built on a lie? A sharp knock at the door startled her, and the card slipped from her hand. She rushed to the window, peering through the curtains, half expecting the strangers to have returned. But it was just her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, waving cheerily as she passed by with her dog. Emily exhaled shakily and forced herself to smile back. Life outside her home continued as normal, but inside, Emily was trapped in a whirlwind of uncertainty. She quickly picked up the card and shoved it into the kitchen drawer, far out of sight, as if hiding it could somehow undo the conversation that had just taken place. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Emily sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television while John flipped through the channels. His face lit up when he found a baseball game, but Emily couldn't focus on anything. "Are you okay?" John asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "You've been quiet all night." Emily forced a smile, but it felt like a mask. "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. Her mind was churning, replaying the stranger's words over and over. She wanted to tell John, to share the burden of this madness with him, but something held her back. Maybe it was fear. Fear that if she spoke the words out loud, they would become real. Fear that if John knew, her entire world would truly fall apart. So she kept the secret, for now. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she knew she couldn't keep it hidden forever. The next morning dawned in Riverton, the same as always, but to Emily, everything felt different. The mundane rhythms of life, the sounds of the morning commute, and even the smell of breakfast cooking seemed to carry an undercurrent of something darker, something dangerous that now loomed over her. The card with the phone number the strangers had left sat heavy in her mind. Even though it was safely hidden away in the kitchen drawer, every time she walked past it, she could almost feel its presence, like it was burning through the wood, calling to her, demanding that she acknowledge the impossible reality it represented. But Emily did what she had always done when life became overwhelming. She buried it. She buried the questions, the confusion, and the gnawing fear that the life she had built was nothing more than a facade. After all, she had children to care for, a job to do, and a husband who expected her to be steady and reliable. And for as long as she could remember, that's who she had always been. Steady, reliable Emily. As she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her hair, she forced herself to focus on the routine. John was downstairs, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper like every other day, and the kids were arguing about who got to sit in the front seat on the way to school. Everything was normal. She needed it to stay that way. But as she looked at her reflection, something strange happened. For the first time in her life, she didn't fully recognize the person staring back at her. Her face, the familiar contours, the same eyes she'd always known, now seemed foreign, like she was looking at a stranger. The thought sent a cold shiver down her spine, and she quickly turned away from the mirror, focusing on getting dressed, forcing herself back into the routine that had always kept her grounded. At breakfast, Tommy and Lily chattered excitedly about their upcoming school play, oblivious to the storm swirling inside their mother's head. John looked up from his paper and smiled at Emily, his eyes warm and filled with affection. "You seem a little off today," he said, his tone light but concerned. "You all right?" "Yeah, just tired," Emily replied, her voice sounding distant even to herself. "Didn't sleep well last night." John nodded sympathetically and returned to his paper. But as Emily stood at the counter, pouring herself another cup of coffee, she felt her heart start to race. She needed to tell him. She couldn't keep this secret any longer. What if there was truth to what the strangers had said? What if her entire life really was a lie? John deserved to know, didn't he? But just as she opened her mouth to speak, the doorbell rang, slicing through the tense air like a knife. Emily froze, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. For a brief moment, her mind went wild with panic. What if it was them again? What if they had come back to force her to confront whatever dark secret they believed she was hiding? "I'll get it," John said, already standing up and heading for the door. Emily's heart pounded as she watched him walk down the hall. She couldn't move, her feet glued to the floor, her breath stuck in her throat. But then she heard John's voice, relaxed and friendly, greeting whoever was on the other side of the door. "It's just the mailman," John called out, chuckling as he returned to the kitchen, a small package in hand. "Nothing to worry about." Emily exhaled slowly, her body relaxing slightly as she realized it wasn't the strangers. But the moment of relief was short-lived, because in the back of her mind, the questions were still there, whispering to her, refusing to let her go. Later that day, after dropping the kids off at school and John had left for work, Emily found herself sitting alone in the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She stared at the drawer where she had hidden the card, her heart thudding heavily in her chest. She knew she had to make a decision. She could either pretend none of this had ever happened, that her life was exactly what she believed it to be, or she could dig into the past and uncover whatever dark truth was lurking there. Her hand moved almost on its own, reaching for the drawer, pulling it open. The card lay there, innocuous, and yet filled with unimaginable weight. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers, reading and rereading the number as if the answer to her questions would suddenly materialize out of thin air. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at the card, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. What if the strangers were wrong? What if they were lying, manipulating her for some unknown reason? But then again, what if they were right? What if everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie? Finally, with a deep breath, she made her decision. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling as she dialed the number. Each ring felt like an eternity, her heart pounding in her ears as she waited for someone to pick up. "Hello." The voice on the other end was the woman from the previous day, calm and expectant, as if she had been waiting for this call all along. "This is Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said you had answers. I need to know the truth." The woman's voice softened. "I understand how difficult this must be for you, but I promise, once you hear everything, you'll understand why it was kept from you. Just tell me," Emily said, gripping the phone tightly. "I can't live like this, not knowing." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a heavy silence that made Emily's heart race even faster. And then, the woman began to speak. "Your name isn't Emily Cooper," she said quietly. "You were born Olivia Mercer, the daughter of a man named Robert Mercer." The name sent a jolt through Emily, though she didn't recognize it. "Who is Robert Mercer?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Your biological father was a powerful man, involved in, let's just say, activities that attracted the wrong kind of attention. When you were very young, things went bad, and he made enemies, dangerous enemies. He had you placed into foster care under a new identity to protect you from those who would have used you to get to him. Your entire life. You've been living in hiding without even knowing it. Emily felt like the ground was falling out from under her. The room spun as the woman's words sank in. Her mind raced to make sense of it all, but nothing fit. How could this be true? How could she, an ordinary woman living in a small town, be connected to something so dark and dangerous? I don't understand, Emily whispered. Why now? Why are you telling me this now? Because, the woman said, her voice growing somber, the people who wanted your father dead, they found out about you. They know who you are. And they're coming. A cold wave of fear washed over Emily, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone. What do you mean? Coming for me? What do they want? They want what your father left behind, the woman said cryptically. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. That's why we need to meet in person. There's more to this than you can imagine. Emily's mind was spinning, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to process the enormity of what she was hearing. I need to think, she stammered, her voice cracking. I understand, the woman replied gently, but don't wait too long. Time isn't on your side. The call ended, leaving Emily sitting in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of fear, confusion, and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could her life, a life she thought she knew so well, suddenly be thrown into turmoil by something so unimaginable? As the day wore on, Emily tried to go about her normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every shadow, every stranger passing by the window, sent a fresh wave of paranoia coursing through her. She felt like her entire world was collapsing in on itself, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By the time John and the kids came home that evening, Emily had made a decision. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. Whatever this was, whatever danger she was in, she needed help. And John, despite everything, was the one person she had always been able to rely on. After dinner, once the kids were tucked into bed, she sat John down in the living room. The TV flickered with the glow of the evening news, but Emily wasn't paying attention. Her heart pounded as she turned to face him, her hands trembling in her lap. John, she began, her voice shaky. There's something I need to tell you. John looked up from the TV, concern immediately clouding his face. What's wrong? You've been acting strange all day. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Yesterday, 2 people came to the house. They said I'm not who I think I am. They said my real name is Olivia Mercer and that I've been living under a false identity my entire life. John's face paled, his eyes widening as he stared at her. What are you talking about? Emily's voice broke as she continued, the weight of everything finally crashing down on her. John stared at Emily in disbelief, his brow furrowed as he tried to process what she was saying. His usually calm demeanor was slipping, replaced by visible confusion and concern. Emily's hands trembled as she wrung them in her lap, waiting for him to say something. The silence stretched on, the ticking of the clock in the background the only sound in the room. Emily, John finally said, his voice low and cautious, what exactly did they tell you? This sounds impossible. They told me that my real name isn't Emily Cooper, she whispered, her voice barely holding together. They said I'm Olivia Mercer. They told me that my father was a dangerous man, that I was placed in foster care to protect me from the people who wanted to kill him, and that they found me. They're coming for me, John. And they want something from me. Something that belonged to my father. John's face turned pale as he absorbed her words, but his eyes flickered with something Emily couldn't quite place, something that made her stomach twist with anxiety. Emily, he said slowly, his voice steady, but with a tightness behind it. You can't seriously be considering this. Whoever these people are, they must be mistaken. There's no way your life could have been kept from you like that. I mean, think about it. You've lived here your whole life. You've built a family, a career. This just doesn't make sense. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the normalcy of their life, the simple truth that everything was as it had always seemed. But she couldn't shake the memory of the strangers' cold, unflinching eyes, the certainty in their voices, and the fear they had planted in her mind. "I know how it sounds," she said, her voice breaking. "But what if it's true? What if my entire life has been a lie? What if there's something I don't know about myself, something dangerous?" John leaned forward, placing his hand on hers. "Emily, listen to me. You've had a good life here. I don't care what these people said. You've never been in danger. And you've never been involved in anything like what they're talking about. They're lying to you, trying to scare you." But even as he spoke, Emily noticed a slight tremor in his voice, a hesitation in his eyes that made her stomach churn with doubt. John had always been her rock, the one person she trusted completely. But now there was something off about him. He was too quick to dismiss what had happened, too insistent that it wasn't true. A part of her, deep down, began to wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. "John," she whispered, her heart pounding, "are you sure you're telling me everything? Because if you know something, anything, you need to tell me now." John's eyes widened in surprise at her question, but then they softened, and he let out a long, deep sigh. He stood up, running his hand through his hair, pacing back and forth across the room as if he was wrestling with something inside himself. "Emily, he started, but his voice faltered, and he stopped, staring at the floor. "There's something I've never told you, something I didn't think you needed to know. It wasn't my secret to tell." Emily's heart sank as her worst fears were confirmed. Her hands gripped the edge of the couch, and her voice trembled as she asked, "John, what are you saying?" He looked up at her, his face etched with guilt and regret. "When we got married, I knew there was a chance that your past wasn't what it seemed. I found out some things, but I didn't think they would ever affect us. I thought we could have a normal life. I thought that as long as we stayed here, in Riverton, everything would be okay." Emily stared at him in disbelief, her world crumbling even further. "You knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You knew all along, and you never told me." "I didn't want to scare you," John said, his voice filled with desperation. "I thought it would never matter. I thought we could just leave it all behind. I didn't think." "You didn't think I had the right to know the truth." Emily cut him off, her voice rising in anger. "You didn't think I deserved to know who I really am. What else are you hiding from me?" John looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I didn't know everything, Emily. I only found out bits and pieces. After we got married, I did some digging into your background, and I found out that your adoption was unusual. There were documents sealed by the court, names that didn't match up. I was curious, but I didn't want to open a door that we couldn't close. I thought I was protecting you." Emily felt as if the room was closing in on her, the walls pressing down, suffocating her. She stood up, her legs shaky, and moved away from him, needing space, needing to think. "So you kept this from me all these years," she said, her voice filled with bitterness. "You let me believe everything was fine, when all along you knew there was something wrong. How could you do that to me?" John took a step toward her, but she held up her hand to stop him. "Emily, I swear, I thought it was for the best. I didn't want you to live in fear. And nothing ever happened, until now." "Until now," Emily repeated, her voice cold. "And now they found me. These people, whoever they are, know who I am. And they're coming for me. And you let this happen." John's face crumpled, and he sank back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Emily turned away from him, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of everything she had just learned. The man she had trusted with her life, with her heart, had been hiding this monumental secret from her. The weight of it crushed her, leaving her gasping for air. She felt like she was unraveling, her sense of self, her identity, falling apart piece by piece. "I need to go," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to think. John looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain. Emily, please, don't go. We can figure this out together. But she couldn't stay. Not with him. Not now. She grabbed her coat and her keys and headed for the door, ignoring John's pleas for her to stop. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a shock, waking her from the fog of betrayal that had been clouding her mind. She walked down the street, her thoughts racing, her emotions spiraling out of control. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away. Away from John, away from the lies, away from the life she thought she knew. She wandered for what felt like hours, her mind going over every detail of her life. Every memory, every moment that now felt like a lie. Who was she, really? If her name wasn't Emily Cooper, then who was she? What did her real family want from her? What danger was she in? Finally, she found herself standing in front of the Riverton Library, the small familiar building offering a strange sense of comfort. She pushed open the doors and stepped inside, grateful for the quiet, the stillness. She needed to think, to figure out what to do next. She found a secluded corner and sat down, her mind still racing. She couldn't go back home, not yet. She couldn't face John, not until she had a plan. But what could she do? Where could she go? Then a thought occurred to her. The strangers who had come to her house. Maybe they had answers. Maybe they could help her understand what was really going on. She pulled out her phone and stared at the card with the number, her fingers trembling as she dialed it once again. The phone rang, and after a few moments, the same woman's voice answered. "Emily," she said, her tone calm but urgent. "I was wondering when I would hear from you again." "I need to know more," Emily said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I need to know the truth." "We can meet," the woman said. "But you have to understand, once you hear everything, there's no going back." Emily took a deep breath. "I don't care. I need to know." The woman gave her a location, a park on the outskirts of town, secluded and quiet. They would meet in the morning. As Emily hung up the phone, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep running from her past. It was time to face the truth, no matter what it was. For the first time in her life, Emily, no, Olivia, felt the weight of her real identity settling over her like a shadow, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The following morning arrived too soon, dragging Emily, no, Olivia, from a restless, haunted sleep. She lay in bed for a few minutes, her heart still pounding from a dream that evaporated as soon as she opened her eyes, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. John was already awake, though he hadn't said a word since the night before. They had slept in the same bed, but the distance between them felt like a canyon. She glanced over at him. He sat at the edge of the bed, hunched over, staring at the floor as if the weight of everything they'd hidden from each other was pressing down on him. His face was pale, the bags under his eyes darker than usual. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. But Olivia couldn't bring herself to feel sympathy for him. Not yet. The betrayal still stung too much. "I'm meeting them today," she said quietly, her voice rough from disuse. It was the first time she had spoken to him since she stormed out the night before. John's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn to look at her. "Emily, Olivia," he began, his voice strained. "I don't think you should. These people, they're dangerous. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." "I don't have a choice," she snapped, sitting up and swinging her legs over the side of the bed. "I can't live like this. I need to know who I really am. And you can't stop me." John finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "I just don't want you to get hurt. I didn't tell you everything because I thought it would keep you safe." Olivia laughed bitterly. "Safe? You think lying to me kept me safe? I've been living in a bubble, John. A bubble that's about to burst, and now I'm completely unprepared for whatever's coming. You didn't protect me. You left me defenseless. She stood up, her movements stiff and tense, and grabbed a jacket from the closet. She could feel John watching her, his guilt hanging in the air between them, but she didn't have the energy to deal with his emotions. Not today. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice cold. "Don't follow me." John didn't try to stop her. He just sat there, his head hanging low as she walked out the door, the weight of her words crushing him. Outside, the morning was gray and overcast, a chill in the air that matched the tension swirling inside Olivia. She had barely slept, her mind racing with questions and possibilities, all of them dark and unnerving. The park where she was supposed to meet the strangers was about a half-hour drive away, on the edge of town, tucked between the woods and the riverbank. It was a quiet spot where locals sometimes fished or took long walks, but this early in the morning, it would be empty. As she drove, Olivia felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She tried to focus on the road, but her thoughts kept pulling her in different directions, replaying everything she had learned over the past 2 days. Was her father really the dangerous man the strangers had implied? What had he done? And why had they come for her now, after all these years? The weight of it all was suffocating. She couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would change everything, that once she stepped into the park, there would be no going back. The person she had been, Emily Cooper, wife, mother, teacher, was already slipping away, and what was left behind felt like a stranger. When she finally pulled into the small gravel parking lot near the park's entrance, Olivia's hands were trembling. She turned off the engine and sat in the car for a few moments, staring at the tree line that bordered the park. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze, as if they knew the secrets buried within them. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and walked toward the trailhead that led into the park. The path wound through the trees, the ground soft beneath her feet, and the world around her seemed eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. After a few minutes, she saw them, the 2 strangers from before, standing at the edge of a clearing near the riverbank. They were dressed in the same dark coats as before, their postures stiff and formal. The man stood with his hands in his pockets, his sunglasses shielding his eyes despite the overcast sky. The woman held a small folder in her hands, her expression unreadable. They watched her approach, their eyes never leaving her. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to keep walking. She wouldn't show them how afraid she was. She wouldn't let them see her weakness. "You came," the woman said, her voice neutral. There was no surprise in it, no emotion. "I need answers," Olivia replied, stopping a few feet away from them. "No more cryptic warnings. No more half-truths. Just tell me what's going on." The woman nodded and glanced at her companion, who gave a small nod in return before stepping away to keep watch. The woman opened the folder and pulled out a photograph, handing it to Olivia. The picture was old, faded at the edges, but clear enough. It showed a man, her father, Robert Mercer, standing next to a sleek, black car. He was younger than she had imagined, his face sharp and serious, but with a hint of warmth in his eyes. A man of power, of control. "This is your father," the woman said. Robert Mercer was one of the most influential men in the underworld 30 years ago. He was involved in everything: arms dealing, black market trade, political corruption. But more importantly, he was a man with enemies. Dangerous enemies. Olivia stared at the photograph, her chest tightening. She barely remembered her father. The memories she did have were blurry and incomplete, fragments of a life she had long since buried. But now, looking at this picture, she felt an inexplicable connection, a strange pull toward the man in the photograph. "Why did he leave me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did he put me in foster care?" The woman sighed, folding her arms across her chest. "Your father made a lot of enemies. When things started to fall apart for him, he realized that the people after him wouldn't stop until they destroyed everything he loved. So he made the hardest decision a man in his position could make. He disappeared. He cut all ties with the life he had built, including you, to protect you. But if he disappeared, Olivia said, frowning, why are these people still after me? He's gone. What could they possibly want from me? The woman exchanged a glance with her companion before answering. Your father didn't just disappear. Before he went into hiding, he left behind something valuable. And the people who want it have been looking for it ever since. For years, no one knew where it was, but now, they believe you're the key. Olivia's heart raced. The key to what? The key to finding what your father left behind, the woman said. It's worth more than you can imagine. Enough to buy power, influence, and control. And the people who are after it, they'll stop at nothing to get it. A wave of nausea washed over Olivia. She felt like she was being swept up in something much larger than herself, something she had no control over. Her whole life, she had lived in quiet oblivion, never knowing that this storm was brewing beneath the surface. Why didn't they come for me sooner? She asked, her voice trembling. Why now? They didn't know where you were, the woman explained. Your father did a good job of hiding you. But recently, some old records resurfaced, mistakes from the past that pointed them in your direction. And now that they know who you are, they won't stop until they have what they're looking for. Olivia stared at the woman, trying to wrap her mind around everything she had just learned. Her life, her entire existence, had been shaped by decisions made long before she was old enough to understand. She had been living in the shadow of a man she barely remembered, a man whose choices had now come back to haunt her. So what do I do? She asked, her voice hollow. How do I stop them? You can't, the woman said, her tone blunt. But we can help you. We've been watching these people for years, monitoring their movements. We know what they want and how they operate. If you cooperate with us, we can protect you. Olivia shook her head, disbelief clouding her thoughts. Why should I trust you? You show up at my house, tell me my life is a lie, and expect me to just go along with it. The woman's expression softened. I understand this is hard to believe, but you don't have much of a choice. You're in danger, Olivia. Real danger. These people won't stop until they find what they're looking for, and they'll use you to get it, whether you want to help them or not. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had spent her entire life trying to build something normal, something stable, and now it was all falling apart. I need time to think. The woman gave a slow nod, her eyes understanding but firm. I understand, Olivia, but you don't have a lot of time. These people are ruthless. They know you're here, and it's only a matter of time before they find you. The longer you wait, the more danger you're in. Olivia felt the gravity of the woman's words, the weight pressing heavily on her chest. Her life had turned upside down in a matter of days. First, the revelation that her identity wasn't real, and now she was being hunted by people she didn't know, for reasons she didn't understand. She had no idea who to trust anymore. Even John, the man she thought she knew better than anyone, had kept secrets from her. I'll be in touch, the woman said, her voice cutting through Olivia's spiraling thoughts. When you're ready to make a decision, call us. But be careful who you talk to in the meantime. You never know who might be listening. With that, the woman turned and walked back toward her partner, who had been standing silently by the tree line. They exchanged a few hushed words before walking deeper into the woods, disappearing from sight as easily as they had arrived. Olivia stood there, rooted to the spot for what felt like an eternity, the wind rustling the leaves around her. She stared down at the photograph in her hands, her father's face staring back at her, a man she had never truly known, whose decisions were still shaping her life decades later. What now? What was she supposed to do? How was she supposed to protect herself from something she didn't understand, from people she couldn't even name? She looked around at the empty park, feeling utterly alone. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her back to reality. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. John's name lit up. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. She wasn't ready to talk to him. Not yet. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and started walking back toward the parking lot, her mind racing. She needed to think, needed space to figure out her next move. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees seemed darker, the air colder. Every snap of a twig or rustle of a leaf sent her heart racing. By the time she reached her car, she was practically running. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. She slammed the door shut and locked it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She felt paranoid, like at any moment, someone could jump out from behind the trees and grab her. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. This was real. She wasn't imagining it. These people were after her, and now she had a choice to make: stay and fight, or run. But where could she go? Where could she hide from people who had the resources and the power to track her down, no matter where she went? And what about Tommy and Lily? They were innocent in all of this, completely unaware of the dangers surrounding their mother. The thought of them being caught in the crossfire made her stomach turn. She had to protect them. That much was clear. But how? As she started the car and pulled out of the lot, her mind raced through the possibilities. Running seemed like the safest option, but where could she go that these people wouldn't find her? And even if she ran, what kind of life would that be for her children? Always looking over their shoulders, always in fear. But staying meant facing the unknown. It meant trusting people she didn't know, people who had shown up unannounced, claiming to have her best interests at heart. And what about John? Could she trust him? After all these years, after everything they had been through, he had still kept this massive secret from her. How could she rely on him now? Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sight of her house as she pulled into the driveway. The quiet suburban street, with its manicured lawns and cozy homes, suddenly felt foreign, like a stage set in some play she no longer had a role in. Everything about her life felt like a lie now. She killed the engine and sat there, staring at the house. John's car was parked in its usual spot, the curtains drawn in the windows. For a moment, she considered driving away, just leaving and never looking back. But where would she go? And she couldn't leave Tommy and Lily behind. Gathering her courage, she stepped out of the car and headed for the front door. She paused on the porch, hesitating for a moment before opening the door and stepping inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. The sound of the television murmured in the living room, but the usual sounds of her children playing, laughing, or bickering were conspicuously absent. Her heart pounded as she stepped further inside, scanning the hallway for any sign of John or the kids. "John," she called, her voice shaky. "Where are you?" There was a rustle from the living room, and John appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "Emily, Olivia." He corrected himself awkwardly. "We need to talk." Her stomach sank at the sight of him, the weight of his betrayal still heavy in the air between them. "Where are the kids?" she asked, her voice cold. "They're with my mom," John replied quickly, his eyes darting nervously. "I thought it would be better for them to be out of the house while we figure this out." Olivia's anger flared at his presumption. "While we figure this out," she repeated, her voice rising. "You've been lying to me for years, John. And now you want to sit down and figure this out like it's just some minor misunderstanding." John looked defeated, his shoulders slumped. "I didn't know it would come to this," he said quietly. "I didn't want to scare you. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Olivia's voice cracked with emotion. "You didn't protect me, John. You left me in the dark, and now these people are coming after me. And maybe after our children, too." John flinched at her words, guilt flashing across his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have told you. I should have trusted you with the truth." Olivia stared at him, the man she had once trusted with her entire life, and felt a mixture of anger and sorrow welling up inside her. The life they had built together, the family they had created, it all felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet. She turned away from him, pacing the length of the room, her thoughts spinning. "I met with them today," she said finally, her voice shaking. "The people who came to the house, they told me that my father left something behind, something valuable. And now these people are after me because they think I have it." John's face paled even further. "What did they say it was?" "They didn't say exactly," Olivia replied, her mind racing. "But whatever it is, it's dangerous. They said these people will stop at nothing to get it." John ran a hand through his hair, his expression desperate. "What are we supposed to do? We can't outrun them, and we can't fight them." "I don't know," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." For the first time in her life, she felt truly powerless. She had always been in control, always the one to manage the household, the children, her job. But now, the weight of the world was crushing her, and she had no idea how to carry it. John took a step closer to her, his voice soft. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. I know I messed up, but I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you and the kids safe." Olivia looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She wanted to believe him, but trust was hard to come by now. As the weight of everything bore down on her, one thought kept circling in her mind. What had her father left behind that was so important it could tear her life apart? And more importantly, how far was she willing to go to protect the family she had fought so hard to build? Olivia sat in the living room long after John had fallen silent, the tension between them still thick in the air. His words lingered, his promises of safety, of figuring this out together, but they felt like empty reassurances. She stared out the window into the darkening street, where the familiar quiet suburban life seemed to continue uninterrupted, as if the chaos of her own world didn't exist beyond the walls of their house. But she knew better. The weight of what the strangers had told her pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them provided any clarity. There was something valuable, something dangerous, connected to her father, Robert Mercer. And whatever it was, people were willing to hunt her down to get it. The question she kept circling back to, the question that gnawed at her, was, what could be so important that they had waited decades to come for it? She couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned, the shadows in the room feeling oppressive, as if they were watching her. At some point, she thought she heard something, a soft creak outside, like footsteps on the porch. But when she looked out the window, there was nothing there. Paranoia was beginning to grip her. In the morning, when the sun finally rose and the house filled with the sounds of life, John moving around in the kitchen, the distant chatter of neighbors heading off to work, Olivia felt no sense of relief. She hadn't called the strangers back yet. She had their number in her phone, but every time she thought about dialing it, her hands shook. She knew once she did, there would be no going back. The truth would be laid bare, and with it, all the dangers they had warned her about. But the looming threat felt closer than ever. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Over breakfast, John was unusually quiet. He tried to act normal for the sake of the kids, but Olivia could feel the tension radiating off of him. It was as if they were playing roles in a play, going through the motions of family life, but both of them knew the script had changed. The truth was now hanging over them, like a storm cloud waiting to unleash its fury. After Tommy and Lily left for school, John turned to Olivia, his face grim. "We need to figure out what to do next," he said, his voice low, careful. "Whatever your father left behind, whatever these people are after, we need to get ahead of it. We can't just wait for them to come to us." Olivia nodded, feeling the same weight of inevitability pressing down on her. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm going to call the woman today. She said they could protect us, but I don't know what that really means." John frowned, his brow furrowing. "I don't trust them. We don't even know who they are. How do we know they aren't just another group trying to use you for whatever your father left behind? The truth of his words stung. Olivia had thought the same thing. How could she trust anyone now? But at the same time, what other option did they have? They were in over their heads, and the feeling of being hunted was becoming unbearable. Later that afternoon, when the house was empty again, and the silence pressed in on her, Olivia found herself staring at her phone. She couldn't put this off any longer. With shaking hands, she dialed the number and waited, her heart racing with every ring. The woman's voice answered on the third ring, calm as ever. "Olivia, I was wondering when you'd call." Olivia swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "I've decided. I need to know everything. I can't keep living like this. What did my father leave behind? Why are these people after me?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if the woman was considering her response carefully. "It's not as simple as that, Olivia. What your father left behind isn't just an object. It's power. The kind of power that can change everything. He was one of the last key holders to a vault that contains information. Information that, if released, could bring down governments, destroy corporations, and shift the balance of power across the world." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Information? What kind of information? "Everything," the woman said. "Financial records, blackmail material, political secrets, things people would kill to keep hidden. Your father gathered it over the years as part of his dealings. He kept it all locked away in a secure vault, and he left the key with you." Olivia felt the room spin around her. "The key? I don't have a key. I don't even know what you're talking about." "You don't have the physical key, no," the woman explained. "But you're the last piece of the puzzle. Without you, the vault stays locked forever. The people hunting you, they know this. They've been searching for you because they believe you hold the final clue to unlocking the vault." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. How could she hold the key to something she didn't even know existed? The enormity of the situation was too much to process. Her entire life, she had been living in ignorance, unaware of the power and danger that had been lurking just beneath the surface. And now it had come crashing down on her. "I don't know anything about a vault," Olivia said, her voice shaky. "I don't know what my father left behind." The woman's tone softened. "I know this is overwhelming, but your father did this to protect you. He made sure you wouldn't know until the time was right. But now that they've found you, you're in danger. They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want." Olivia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "What do they want me to do? Open the vault? Hand over the information? If they find you, they'll force you to," the woman said. "But that's why we're here. We can help you get to the vault first. We can secure the information and keep it safe. But you need to trust us, Olivia. Trust." The word felt like a bitter pill in her mouth. Could she really trust these people? Could she trust anyone? "What happens if I don't help you?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. "What happens if I just run?" The woman was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with quiet seriousness. "If you run, they'll find you. It's only a matter of time. And when they do, they'll use whatever means necessary to force you to give them what they want. You won't be able to protect your family. The only way to keep them safe is to take control of the situation." Olivia closed her eyes, her mind racing. The fear, the uncertainty, the weight of everything. It was all too much. But deep down, she knew the woman was right. She couldn't run from this. She couldn't hide. If she wanted to protect her family, she had to face it head on. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. I'll help you get to the vault." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when the woman spoke again, there was a hint of relief in her voice. "Good. We'll be in touch soon with the next steps. But remember, Olivia, you need to be careful. Trust no one outside of us. These people are closer than you think." The call ended, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of her living room, the weight of her decision crashing down on her. She had just agreed to help a group of strangers unlock a vault that could potentially destroy lives, shift power, and topple governments. And all the while, people were hunting her, people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The door creaked open behind her, and John stepped in, his face pale, his eyes searching hers for answers. "What did they say?" he asked quietly. Olivia took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she tried to gather her thoughts. "They said my father left behind information, dangerous information, and now I'm the only one who can unlock it. If I don't help them, the people hunting me will find another way to force me to do it." John's face darkened, and for a moment, he looked as if he might collapse under the weight of everything they were facing. "What do we do now?" Olivia met his gaze, feeling the fear creeping up her spine. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a flicker of determination. She didn't want this life. She didn't ask for this. But if she had no choice but to face it, she would fight. For herself, for her children, for the life she had built. "We don't run," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she expected. "We fight back." As the words left her lips, she felt a strange sense of clarity wash over her. This was her life now. No more hiding, no more pretending. The person she had been, the quiet, unassuming Emily Cooper, was gone. In her place was Olivia Mercer, a woman with a dangerous legacy, a woman who had no choice but to confront the darkness of her past. And no matter what happened next, she was ready. But in the back of her mind, one question still lingered, haunting her. How far would she have to go to protect her family?